So welcome everyone to the noon hour panel for this Halifax Pride. We are extremely pleased to be here and I want to acknowledge that we are speaking to you from Tuktoyaktuk in the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And today's topic is, are all families equal? Not so for 2SLGBTQIA families in Nova Scotia. So I'm Suzanne Litke, and I will be your moderator today. I'm the co-chair of the Nova Scotia Rainbow Action Project that seeks justice and equity and human rights for all 2SLGBTQIA people in Nova Scotia. We will be exploring some of the discriminatory practices and the framework in Nova Scotia where laws and policies discriminate regarding parentage in our families. Who is deemed a parent and who is not? Who receives services and who does not? How does the present definition of the nuclear family exclude our families? So to begin our presentation today, we're going to welcome Ilana Doty Luther. Ilana has a background in law and policy and is the executive director of the Access to Justice and Law Reform Institute in Nova Scotia. The Institute is a not-for-profit organization that makes recommendations for law reform in our province of Nova Scotia. So welcome, Ilana. And this Access to Nova Scotia and Law Reform Institute has been working in the last probably year to address some of the parentage inequities in 2SLGBTQIA families. How did you come to address this issue?
So we first came across the issue because we were reviewing the Intestate Succession Act. So the Intestate Succession Act is essentially the law that kicks in when someone dies without a will. And we were looking at the definition of child under the Act, and the definition of child said the child of the deceased, the child who inherits, is the adopted or the biological child of the deceased. And we thought, well, wait a second, there's got to be lots of families that, you know, parents that don't have a biological connection to the child or haven't adopted the child. This is leaving those families out. If families are using assisted reproductive technologies, this must be leaving those families out. And at the same time, I had two friends in Ontario who were having their first baby. And at the hospital, one of my friends, Jen, she got quite sick and she was in medical distress. It was quite frightening, but it was most frightening for her wife, who realized, oh my goodness, she was a lawyer. She realized, I don't have any right to this child. I have no right to take this child from the hospital. And I thought, this has to be inconceivable. This cannot happen. And it can't happen in Nova Scotia. But I looked, and sure enough, we had no presumption of parentage for the non-birth mother in Nova Scotia. Not only that, I realized we were one of the only provinces in Canada that did not have an act laying out the presumptions of parentage.
Okay. So that's how you identified the issues. Wonderful. How have you gone about this work?
So this work, what we did was we've put together a large research paper, so outlining all the issues that we're going to need to review. Did you want me to explain what the presumptions of parentage are and how those affect LGBTQ families? Okay, so just to explain, because then that'll help me explain how I'm doing this work. So right from the moment of birth, the law puts into place presumptions of parentage. So as soon as a baby is born, the law says, okay, these are who the babies are. This is who the baby's parents are. So that parent is allowed to make all the decisions with respect to the child, including healthcare decisions, and they have the right to care and custody of the child. So they have the right to take the child from the hospital, for example. And of course, the child of this couple has an immediate right to their full identity on birth, their name, their citizenship, if they have Indian status, their lineage, and their inheritance rights. But most of all, that child has a right to security of knowing their parents, the parents that intend to raise them. And even though this law is so important to all Nova Scotians, we've had essentially the same parentage law in Nova Scotia for hundreds of years. And that parentage law says, quite simply, the woman who gives birth to the child is the mother, and the man married to her is the father. That's the law, right? Yeah, so we can imagine who's left out of that. So the significance is that if you don't fall into this strict two-parent heterosexual couple that didn't use ART, you can't rely upon this presumption of parentage, right? You don't have the immediate care and custody of your child. You don't have the right at the hospital to make decisions, and your child doesn't have their immediate right to identity and security of knowing, of having their parents ascribe to them. So instead, the families that don't fit this heteronormative ideal of the law, instead they have to go to the registry and ask to be registered as parents. And as we're going to hear today, that causes a lot of problems. That can be a shaky status, as opposed to the that heteronormative ideal, which is one man, one woman, they have a baby, and they have this immediately ascribed immutable status of parents. I can give some examples if I have time.
Yeah.
Okay, and some of the examples I think we'll hear today. So for example, let's say there's a lesbian couple who's using a sperm donor. So there's going to be a presumption. When the birth mother has the baby, there's a presumption at law that the birth mother is the mother. That's a parent there. But for the non-birth mother, she doesn't have any presumption of parentage. She's not the parent at the hospital. She can't make medical decisions. She can't take the baby from the hospital. In fact, all she can do is sort of go to the registry and ask the registry, can I be registered as a parent? But guess what? If there's a known sperm donor, she can't. In fact, the known sperm donor has the right to be registered as a parent. And in that situation, the known sperm donor actually gets given a lot of power over that family. If he wanted to, he could get a blood test, prove he's the father, he could oppose adoption proceedings, and he could apply for custody and access under the Parenting and Support Act. But of course, if that whole family got along and they wanted to parent together, we don't have any provision for three parents to parent together. I can give another example if I have time. Okay, the other example, for example, is like two fathers conceiving with a surrogate. So again, they don't fit that ideal that this ancient law in Nova Scotia has created. So in the hospital, the two fathers are not parents, right? In fact, the parents at the hospital are the surrogate, and guess what? The surrogate's married husband, right? They're the parents at the hospital. And so really, the intended parents then have to go to court to get a declaration. They have to ask the court, okay, please allow us to be the parents. And the court may say, okay, but only if the surrogate consents, only if they have a surrogacy agreement in place, and only if one of the fathers has a genetic link, if they've used their sperm to conceive the child. And if they haven't, they're going to have to adopt their own child. So, and as well, I'll say one other situation, which is common law partners. So common law partners as well, they don't have this presumptive right. And even when they go to Vital Stats to register, there's extra hoops that common law partners have to jump through. So we can see when you think about the difference between, the woman who gives birth and the man that's married to her, they are immediately ascribed, they're immediately parents, it's immutable, it can't be changed, it can't be challenged, how different that is from 2SLGBTQIA plus families who have to go to the registry to ask to become parents.
So the Institute has been working for some time now to make recommendations to government. What do you hope to see as an outcome?
So what I hope to see, we'll be putting together a report. So we're looking at issues like how do we expand that old ancient law to include presumptions for parents in the 2SLGBTQIA plus community, ensuring donors are not considered parents at birth. We have a a wonderful group, an advisory group who is advising us on this issues paper, and then we're going to put this paper out to the public. And we're going to ask the public, how do you think the law should be changed? And what I really hope the outcome is that we're the last province in Canada that does not have an act that sets out like these presumptions of parent. Who is a parent on birth? So we really need an act that sets out presumptions of parentage that are inclusive, that are not discriminatory. And it's great. We need to change the Vital Statistics Act, but most of all, parentage needs to be ascribed to everyone at the moment of birth. It can't just be limited to this one heteronormative paradigm, this couple that we've had in ancient law in Nova Scotia for several hundreds of years. We've moved on.
So you've described making recommendations to the government and then a public consultation. And how is that going to roll out?
Yeah, so what we're going to do, we compile, after we get the advice of the advisory group, we compile a consultation document. We take it out to the public. So we'll engage different communities that have a special interest in the legislation. We'll go to public libraries all across the province. So what we do is we'll explain the issue, and we'll ask feedback from people, like, how do you think, in your experience, what do you think the best way to establish this law is, to develop this law is? Once that's done, then we put together a report and we present it to government.
And after that presentation to government, there would need to be somebody drafting a bill.
Yeah.
I would expect to go before the legislature.
Yes.
What sort of barriers do you expect will arise when that's presented as a bill?
I mean, I think the barrier that may arise, and it's the barrier that always arises on law reform, is really motivating government to put this wonderful bill into place. So I'll tell you, this is what happened in Ontario. They developed Cy Ruby's law, which expanded these presumptions of parentage to 2SLGBTQIA plus families. And they had an NDP member present the bill, but they were worried that this bill wouldn't move at a fast enough pace. So what they did is they initiated a litigation in Ontario. It was called Grand v. Ontario. And you know what? They said, this is unconstitutional. We want this declared to be a violation of our equality rights as Canadians. And the government didn't even go to trial. It was settled. And in that settlement, they had the different principles from the bill that they wanted. So, you know, sometimes, like that's always our big barrier, is motivation by government. We can see in Ontario that they've used a certain avenue to maybe like spur motivation. So yeah, that's probably the barrier. That's the barrier, yeah.
So we know that laws don't change fast,
No.
And it's a slow process,
Yes.
but sometimes litigation or complaints to government can make a difference.
Can speed things along.
Okay. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.
We're going to now move to Krista Hartland-Cote. Krista is a queer cis female of white settler ancestry. She is a wife and a mom of a baby with disabilities. She's passionate about advocacy work and strives to use her privilege and access to those empowered to effect change. She and her spouse, Jackie, became parents last summer when Krista gave birth. Krista is grateful for the opportunity to speak on her family's behalf about their fight for equal parentage. So, Krista, the Nova Scotia Vital Statistics legislation and regulations have greatly affected your family because they made a discriminatory distinction about who is a parent in your family. And sort of picking up on some of what Alana has already spoken to, can you describe how that law first affected your family?
Yes, as parents do when their baby is born, we registered our baby's birth and put myself as a parent, and then filled out my spouse, Jackie, as the second parent. And we filled out the form truthfully, as we were instructed to do. It gives an opportunity to choose the gender of the other parent, and we sent that off and then got a phone call about a month and a little bit afterwards letting us know that because we did not use assisted reproductive technology, assisted conception, and because we do know the sperm donor, then Jackie would be removed from our child's birth certificate.
So how did that affect your family when Jackie was removed?
Well, having only one of us be a legal parent obviously leaves us vulnerable to any sort of situation. If something were to happen to me, I had a high-risk pregnancy and things worked out fine for me, but could have not. That would leave Jackie in a predicament where there's no presumption of parenthood or parentage. And of course, you want to be recognized as the parent of your child. We were told we are welcome to adopt our child. Nobody wants to adopt the child that they created and intended to parent from the beginning. That's not what adoption is when you think of a typical example of adoption. And we've had some medical complexities, a medical emergency, and en route to the hospital, you want to be thinking about the wellness of your child and the safety. And what we were wondering is if Jackie was going to be allowed in the emergency room. Things were unfortunately quite dire, and there were very serious life or death decisions that were needing to be made. And we didn't even know if Jackie was going to be allowed to do that. Thankfully, our hospital recognized us both as parents, but that very easily could have gone in a different direction, and Jackie wouldn't have been allowed to make those decisions and wouldn't have been allowed to participate. And again, we're still very vulnerable. If something happens to me today, what happens to the baby?
Mm-hmm. So who was it that told you you would be welcome to adopt your child, or to Jackie?
The representative called me because I'm the person that is allowed to be the parent and was the birth parent, and that was the representative from Vital Statistics.
Okay. And from what you know about adoption, what would that process look like, and how would that affect your family?
I understand that we pay money to be allowed for the two of us to adopt the child. And you might be thinking, no, just Jackie, but no, it's the two of us, because a married person, as we are, adopting a child in Nova Scotia, the person they are married to must also adopt the child, which is me. So my egg, my womb, my adoption.
Okay. Can you describe what your family has done since your child was born to address this discriminatory treatment?
Yes, lots of advocacy, lots of education to others. Many people aren't aware of this, and most recently we've filed a human rights complaint to the Human Rights Commission of Nova Scotia.
Okay, and can you describe for the audience around what that complaint was like and how you filed it, what happened there?
Yeah, with the assistance of Dell Legal Aid and NSREP, we have filed on the basis of sexual orientation, sex, family status, and marital status, because all of those characteristics have been in question or used as discrimination. And it was a lengthy form to fill out to, in great detail, explain how we felt there was discrimination, what happened, all the details of the conversations we had had, and what we would like as an outcome.
Okay, so when you mention the grounds of discrimination, so you're talking about the Human Rights Act in Nova Scotia that provides some protected characteristics for folks, and so they are sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, etc. Okay, and you made your claim against the government, or who did you complain against?
Yeah, Vital Statistics, because the reason that we got a phone call is initially is because of this discriminatory. I don't know whether to call it a policy or a law, but whatever it is, this is embedded in our legislation in Nova Scotia that two moms who know their donor and did not use assisted conception cannot both be on a birth certificate. So that is sexual orientation. We verified by asking the registrar directly if my wife was male, had an M designation. Would we have ever gotten that phone call? We would not have, they confirmed. So there are people that do the same thing that we did to conceive. They have an intended parent that is not the biological or genetic parent, that is the second parent. They use a known donor, and they have an M designation on their gender marker for their ID, however that is, whether that's a transgender male, whether that's a cisgender male, doesn't matter, then that is fine. They never get a phone call asking if that person is indeed a genetic or biological parent to that child. So it was on the basis of sex that phone call, that was flagged, that we got that phone call.
Okay.
And marital status, because marriage, as was previously mentioned, has an extra layer about how things are handled if we are or are not married.
Okay. What do you hope to see as an outcome?
Oh, I would like us to both be parents. I would like all families who decide to conceive and have a child have all of the parents who were part of that process be able to be recognized as parents to that child from their birth, just like cis straight people get to do.
Okay, so you mentioned a policy that's sort of embedded in this law, or us lawyers would call that the regulations.
Regulation, that's the
underneath
word
it.
I was
Right.
looking for. Thank you.
And so who do you think that those regulations are protecting? What's going on there?
I don't even know who it's protecting right now. I don't think anyone. I think that it's a lot of work to make change, and it makes waves, and we're coming up on an election. And so keeping things the status quo and not drawing attention to things that are considered partisan issues is a political strategy.
Okay, so you've described this distinction between using a known donor and an unknown donor, and how that removes the parentage of one of the parents. Okay, thank you, Krista.
Thank
very
you.
much for telling your story, and for the advocacy work that you're doing.
Thanks.
We'll now move to Dr. Heather Cockwell, who is one of 3 physicians who work at the Atlantic Assisted Reproductive Therapies, which is an institute in the Atlantic region that provides fertility care for folks. She's also the head of the Division of Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Dalhousie University. Heather is passionate about equity in access to care for all individuals, and has successfully campaigned in the past for increased coverage for those seeking fertility preservation prior to gender affirmation surgery. She is currently working to increase coverage and access for all individuals to fertility care, regardless of gender, identity, or who they choose to love. So Heather, you've heard some of the distinctions now that have been made in identifying who is a parent. In your role as a medical professional, you've actually identified a discriminatory practice that greatly affects members of our community who are looking to become parents, so before gestation.
Yes, yeah.
Can you describe that discriminatory practice that you've identified?
Yeah, so what I do primarily is fertility care. So people who are having trouble getting pregnant or just want a parent come to me, and we do a workup for both partners. If there are 2 partners, if it's a single individual, we do a workup of that individual. And then we advise them about the best ways that they would be able to conceive. If a heterosexual, male-female, cisgendered couple come and see me to do this, it is covered under the provincial medical insurance, so MSI. If a single individual or an individual who is anything else in the 2SLGBTQIA+ community comes to see me, the visits that they come to see me, their initial appointment, their initial consultation, and all of their follow-up visits are not covered under MSI. Simply because they are not a cisgendered male and a cisgendered female coming to see me together. And to me, that is ridiculous. I don't understand, and I can't fathom an actual reason why anyone shouldn't be able to come and see me and get the exact same advice. And it's funny because you were giving examples. So if I have a couple, cisgendered male, cisgendered female, they come and see me and I work them up, and the guy, for whatever reason, has no sperm. They're going to do donor sperm. Okay. Until they make a decision to actually do donor sperm, everything is covered. If a couple comes to see me where we have a cisgendered female and a trans man, well, my trans man does not have sperm, so we know from the start they're probably going to need donor sperm, but their initial visit, their initial consultation, their follow-up and part of their workup, not covered. Even though at the end of the day, I'm going to tell these couples who both, you know, are the same, they're not different in any way, I'm going to tell them the exact same thing. You need donor sperm. But couple A has probably paid the clinic, they don't pay me directly, has paid the clinic, you know, $300 to $500 to find that out. Whereas, sorry, the couple A, the one that the cisgender heterosexual couple, will have paid nothing. Couple B, who do not have both sets of gametes available to them, the sperm and the egg, don't have those easily accessible, they'll have paid the clinic probably around $500 to do that, which I think is silly. So what I'm trying to do right now is, I have it out into the Ministry of Health right now. I've written them a letter saying, this is ridiculous. And I think it very much discriminates against a large part of our community, but it also, it smacks of us saying who should parent. So it almost says, if you're single or if you don't fit this heteronormative cisgendered coupleship, you shouldn't be parents. You have to pay to become parents. Whereas if you aren't, then we'll pay for you to become parents. Thank you very much. I think that's silly. So that's where I'm going. I'm working on it.
So what actions have you taken?
So first of all, I've worked with Doctors Nova Scotia in the past. You sort of mentioned that with the, to access coverage for transgender individuals who are going to consider gender affirmation surgery if they wish to do some sort of fertility preservation prior, whether that be eggs or sperm. Previously, those visits weren't covered. And I was able to argue to them that that's not fair.
Argue to who? To them?
Sorry, to MSI.
To
So I went
MSI,
direct. So with
okay.
Doctors Nova Scotia, I was able to go to MSI and say, this doesn't make sense. You'll cover it for these people, but you won't cover it for these people. And they sort of said, huh, okay. I was, admittedly, arguing at the same time for oncology patients. So I was arguing oncofertility preservation and gender affirmation preservation, and together we got that through. So MSI said, okay, yeah, no, you can, we'll give you coverage for that. So we have that coverage now. What I'm trying to argue right now requires a policy change, because the policy or the regulations actually are specific about if the persons who are coming to see you are going to access any sort of assisted reproductive technology, so be that donor sperm, donor egg, or donor gametes, or donor embryo, or whatever, if that's their intention from the beginning, then those services are never covered. So the consultations and stuff aren't covered, but that doesn't really make sense, because not everybody who comes to me without donor sperm or donor egg who's interested in that, they may not do that in the end. So they have to do the workup first before they know whether they want to access assisted reproductive technology. So that, to me, should be covered.
Heather, how many people are we talking about that would have to pay for their consultation with ART? When you look at, when you compare the two
It's not a large portion, although I have to say I don't know how many people aren't coming to see us because this barrier is there, right? So I believe, and I think people in the community will probably support me in this belief, that there's a lot of people who don't come to see us because they feel that this is a discriminatory policy and they don't have to pay for it. So they will do, they'll try and become parents in other ways. So they'll do it at home, essentially, without involving someone like me in the system. In our clinic, we see about 60 to 70 couples, or single individuals or couples per year, who fall under this, we have to pay because we are not the heteronormative cisgender couple. some of those are single, and some of those are a whole mixture of people who are in the community, the LGBTQ plus community. And then on top of that, we probably see about 20 to 30 fertility preservation type consultations a year as well, which are now covered as of May 1st.
Thanks to you.
Well, yeah, so, which is great. I'm really excited about that part. So, yeah, so I kind of got emboldened by the first part, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to hit the next thing that bothers me, and then after that, I'm going to hit something else.
So how has it come to be that you're now speaking out?
I mean, this has been an issue for a long time, and I think at some point in your career, you get to the point where you say, okay, no, this is stupid. This is, I mean, initially, you're just told that's the way it is. And you kind of go with the flow. And I mean, it didn't affect me personally because I have a cisgendered husband. And so when we accessed fertility care, nobody questioned us. It was covered. But when I've gotten older and I've gone through and I see all my patients, I see how many patients are affected by this, it's just gone to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm tired of this now. This needs to change. And if no one else is going to speak up about this, I'm going to speak up about this. And I think as you get further along, and you get older and you get kind of more crotchety, you kind of get to the point where you're like, no, this is wrong. You know what? This needs to fix. And so that's what we're doing.
Okay, so you've written a letter.
Yeah.
And,
that's my first step.
How bold were you in writing that letter?
How bold was I?
Yeah.
I was pretty darn clear, I think. I mean, I was polite, but I basically said pretty clearly that this doesn't make sense. It is discriminatory, and it does run the risk of putting out the idea that Nova Scotia as a province and our government as a specific are valuing some type of parentage more than others. You're valuing the heterosexual coupleship parentage more than you're valuing the single person or the two women or the two men or the woman who's with the trans man or whatever the combination is. Those people aren't, because of the way this works, those people don't seem to be valued. And that's wrong. So we need to fix that. And I haven't heard from them yet, though. That's the thing. I was hoping I'd be able to update and say, oh, I heard from them, but no, not yet.
And you sent the letter a couple of weeks ago.
I did, so I'm giving them 2 weeks. Today is the deadline, in fact. So because I haven't heard from them today, they're going to get another little message from me today saying, I sent you this letter and I have not heard a response. Could you please respond to me? Because they actually have a rule, apparently, that they're supposed to return to me within 2 weeks. So 2 weeks was actually Wednesday, but I gave them until Friday, thinking, I'll give them a little bit of a grace, but at the end of today, if I haven't heard from them, they're getting another little letter from me.
What other advocacy avenues have you thought about if the answer from government is, oh, we'll look at that down the road? I mean, and I can imagine in the middle of a pandemic, they're focusing on other things. Mm-hmm. They're preparing for perhaps a provincial election call shortly. They may not put attention to your letter. So what other options are there?
So if they won't see reason, I hope they're just going to see reason, but I'm not actually naive enough to believe that they will. The next step is going to be advocacy. So it's going to have to be people actually stepping forward and saying, this affects us, this shouldn't be. So that was where I've already spoken to the Pride community and luckily to you guys. So we've already made the connections with Dr. Nova Scotia and NSRAP. And so hopefully we'll be able to sort of galvanize something together and then kind of embarrass the government into saying, like, this is not right. So if you really want to keep this policy there, you have to understand I'm going to embarrass you at every single turn. At this point, I'm trying to be sort of more gentle and more open and be like, this is a silly policy. Did you know this policy existed? And hope they say, no, we didn't. And then when they say, no, we didn't, I say, well, do you agree that it's a silly policy? And when they say, yes, we agree, hopefully, then I'll say, so we're going to change that policy, right? And then we'll see where it goes.
Okay, well, thank you for your advocacy. So a letter writing campaign can bring attention. Mm-hmm. Also, one of the reasons we've asked you to be on this panel is because the rest of, everybody in our province needs to understand that this is a distinction that's been made that is totally ridiculous, and we need to make those changes. So, public pressure can also help a great deal. We'll now come to our fourth panelist. Nuri Amazon is a single, trans, lactating, non-gestational, conceptive, queer femme, and Hebrew parent. He loves and cares for lots of gay babies, nibblies, as well as for compost, soil, home, the land, and community members. Nuri is always trying to find the perfect, elusive balance between prioritizing the kids, income generation, community, family, show up, and self-care. It's a lot.
Haven't found the balance.
Nuri usually wishes he was swimming or dancing instead of cleaning sticky off the walls and the floors. When all families are not treated equally, there can be incredible impact because of unclear and conflicting laws. Nuri, you've experienced some systemic discrimination as a parent post-separation in a family court matter as a result of such conflicting laws and jurisdictional challenges. How were you not treated as a parent by these various systems?
Just to bounce off a little bit of what other people have said so far, you talked about intended parents, and you talked a little bit about who's being valued as a parent. And when my relationship with our child's gestational mother happened, immediately what was challenged was the fact of my parentage. And I think most parents queer, straight, cis, or trans, can attest to the fact that their kids know who their parents are. Like maybe the government doesn't know, maybe your extended family doesn't get it, but your kids know who their parents are. And chas v'chalila, something happens to your kid knows who their parents are.
Yeah.
And that's an immutable fact. And until the government clues into it, families like my own are going to continue to face these discriminatory practices. So in my case, I was, since I was 4, little gay bee, I knew I wanted to parent, and I was told that I wouldn't be able to. And I am a parent, so I went above and beyond. But, you know, I knew about the discriminatory practices along the way, so there was never any intention to ever have to deal with a courtroom or a doctor. So we did it at home. I conceived my kid kind of the old-fashioned way, and with a lot of support from my extended queer family. Unfortunately, because of domestic violence, that crumbled apart. And as a person who didn't want to end up in the court system, who didn't want to be somebody drafting documents to tell a government that I believe to be one of colonialism that isn't going to start valuing our parentage the way that our kids value it, it just didn't seem like the acknowledgement that I needed. In hindsight, it would have made my kids' lives easier. It would have taken immense stress off of my family and community over the course of 3 or 4 years in court, having to kind of go back and bring those things. So because our child was born in Ohio and we intended to live here, immediately what was brought up in court, everything from having to deal with the police. Immediately me as a parent was questioned. My kid literally suckling on my body. Immediately I had to prove that again and again and again. So in each different part of the legal actions that were taken to dismantle our family and separate my child from me, I had to defend my parentage, and jurisdiction was linked to parentage, and immigration was linked to parentage. So, you know, in the most worst nightmare of imagination, you could never imagine the person you're conceiving your child with trying to remove rights from your child, not even just from you. So, unfortunately, in our situation, our child's citizenship was challenged. I was accused of federal fraud, having applied for their citizenship based on their parentage, which obviously included me. I was born in Canada. And because of the way, even in vital stats and the registrar and like everything as a trans parent, how that is I happen to be born in Quebec. So each different piece of that, provincially and then federally, there are conflicts in how that is resolved and who sees me as what. And those kind of played out year after year in court, unfortunately. And the laws did change in the middle of our court situation to federally recognize me as a parent for immigration purposes, but they still hadn't updated their form. And since my child's, since citizenship is granted through, do you remember the word for this? If you're granted citizenship based on parentage, it's granted on the date of birth. So children who were born before this came into law, who are or are not considered Canadian, could retroactively or proactively have their citizenship granted. So in our case, I was accused of fraud, and which obviously the fraud being, there is no fraud. I am a parent, and Nova Scotia recognizes that in the Family and Parenting Act, but because that's not something that happens on a conceptive basis, and the federal, all of these little details kind of played out in what was going to happen to my kid, and where they were going to live and how they were going to be parented. And luckily for us, we were able to navigate a settlement after 3 years, but not after immense cost. The government not actually answering the questions around what they're going to do about all of the people who are falling through the cracks. Yeah, and still not enough legal reform that specifically values our family, that affirms that dismisses. Like, some families don't have to go into court and spend years proving they're a parent. They can just get to the issues at hand, whatever they are, around parentage. I don't think we ever got to those, actually. Like, I think that eventually there came to be like some conclusion through multiple court systems affirming my parentage that the other stuff kind of got resolved. But yeah, so one of the other things that happened is the other parent of our child tried to have me removed from our birth certificate. So again, like, without governments and policies that are actually accepting and holding and valuing us as parents, there are so many ways to discriminate towards families, and federally, internationally, through birth certificates, through the birth registration, vital statistics, immigration. And until we actually hear from government and policies and from the people who are in power, whether they're doctors and lawyers and policymakers and politicians, that queer families and queer possibilities are beautiful and valued, I don't think we're going to see less families falling through the cracks. And until our communities are able to step into positions of power, not power over other people, but power to advocate for ourselves and bring that queer magic to the forefront, I actually don't think there are going to be less people falling through the cracks, whether they register or not, right? Because this is the worst case scenario kind of being brought into the light. Does that answer your question? I don't know if it does.
Well, it does. And how do you think your matter would have been different had there been consistent laws defining parentage and families in your case?
Unfortunately, Nova Scotia, like many other places in the world, suffers from a disproportionately high quantity of domestic violence. And even in those cases, that would have been recognized. My case would have been seen and held on an emergency basis right off the bat, instead of put off for another however many months and years, which, were months and years of my young child's life. And I think, really, if I didn't have to defend my kid's right to me as their parent, the person, their primary parent from the day of conception, the first person that they attached to, who literally suckles them, then we would have just been another case, just another regular family disagreement that ends up in family court, which would have also been agreed through, probably gone through settlement or mediation within the first 8 months to 2 years, like instead of 3 to 4. Like, I don't think there was anything exceptional about our case, except for the fact that I'm trans, except for the fact that we didn't go through a doctor and a lawyer. But even then, I think there are so many people in our community who make those choices, because I think we need all of us. I think we do need queer parents, and I think we do need queer futures.
So what I'm hearing is that the challenges to your parentage and the challenges to the citizenship of your child, and those challenges took much more attention of the court's time and your child's time in this litigation than it needed to.
Unbelievable amounts of resources from our community, which already is experiencing marginalization economically. Like, I am a single parent, and luckily having community and resources available to me to gather when push came to shove, I was able to get to this point. But yeah, the court's time was wasted, like amazingly wasted by inane, like that all could have been easily dismissed. It was totally unnecessary.
And did you find that the judges were reluctant to go down certain roads and to make certain declarations about your parentage?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody was kind of waiting for somebody else to make that decision, whether it be another jurisdiction, federally. Everybody kind of felt like their hands were tied and nobody wanted to deal with it, or nobody wanted to answer to the fact that they were going to decide whether or not I was a parent. And I don't know if that's because they're afraid that all the queer people are going to want to have kids. Like, I actually don't know what that comes from. Because
We're already doing it.
I know. But like, and we've always been doing it. And I think, like I said, my reluctance to go through a legal or medical process was exactly that. I don't think I'm looking for answers from cis straight people to decide about our lives. And now that I have to, yeah. Again, I don't think until we're actually at the table making some of those decisions and helping them forward, I think everybody's way too scared and confused, and maybe feels a little bit challenged. Like, valuing my parenting isn't going to devalue anybody else's parentage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Nuri. I'd like to give any of you an opportunity to respond to some of the information that's been presented by other panelists. So maybe we'll start with you, Lana, if you had any reflections upon hearing the other panelists speak. Anything you'd like to
I have
add?
a lot of I have a lot of reflections.
And
Thank you.
In terms of how it might impact your work at the Institute, for example, or...
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. Like, so we're the we're the Access to Justice and Law Reform Institute. So we do have these two mandates. And just hearing Nuri talk about this situation, like, we are in the middle of, an access to justice crisis in this country. We keep talking about it. I mean, it just seems like hearing these stories, like, and hearing how your parentage is devalued and your child's right to parentage is devalued is extraordinarily sad. And then I put on my governance and policy hat, and I'm thinking, like, well, like, as well. Like it's creating a huge backlog in the courts, right? Like you're using up a huge number of resources unnecessarily. Well, and towards like quite an insidious end, actually. Like if the whole point of this is, you know, to at the end of the day, whether or not it's been done intentionally, it's devaluing, you know, your family, which is an extraordinarily like sad and terrible, thing. Anyways, I have so many more comments, but I'm going to let someone else speak. Yeah.
Krista, did you have?
Yeah, I had a
something that you'd like to add?
few things that that popped up. Heather was talking about the financial side of things, where there's inequities about how people are sort of corralled as to where they're paying for services or they're not paying for services, and it made me think about accessing other bodily fluids. So you don't pay in Canada for a blood transfusion if you need one, but you pay for gametes. But you can't get paid to provide those gametes.
Yes.
So you cannot be paid for lactating. You cannot be paid for donating blood. You cannot be paid as a surrogate. You cannot be paid as a sperm donor, but you can pay a lot of money to get sperm
of those.
and to get those things, right? So it's just interesting who's profiting off of procreation in this situation, and what counts as bodily fluids that are profitable and what are not, you know. The thing that's most easily accessible and much available is the thing that's being, sperm is being charged for the most. Yeah. So it's just wild. And thinking about what you were saying about the different jurisdictions and how there's so many layers. So Jackie has been on parental leave for the last year, paid for by the federal government, because they recognized Jackie as a parent to our baby, yet not the province. And that made me think about, you know, as maybe one day we'll leave our borders again and travel. So looking forward to getting a passport for our baby. What's going to happen? I don't even know. I mean, it's in the back of my head. What happens? Who's recognized as a parent? When we want to travel, what happens? What happens if Jackie wants to travel outside of Canada's borders with the baby and does she need a letter from me because it's a non-parent traveling with a child? There's just so many extra issues, and it just makes me think, you know, what I want people to know that are watching this and taking things away is that things didn't end when we got equal marriage in the 2000s. Things didn't end when we got the right to adopt our children or became allowed to access fertility clinics. Things are not over by any stretch, even our birth certificate. So they've taken the field that used to say father, and they've placed instead father/other parent. They've taken the space that used to say mother, and it now says parent, all under the guise of inclusion and anybody can be a parent, but they're not actually allowing us to do that. And what happens on our birth certificate, they removed Jackie's name and replaced it with not stated. So parent 1, not stated. Parent 2 is me. I should at least get to be parent 1. Ridiculous. Parent 1, they don't ask for a previous name, a birth name, anything like that. Jackie and I have the same last name, our married family last name. So there's only one last name. Hartland Cote is the last name. My maiden name, my birth name is there, so it's Krista Hartland, Jacqueline Hartland Cote, and the baby has Hartland Cote as a last name. So they have the same last name, and I have a different one on the birth certificate where I am parent number 2.
It's just silly. It's crazy, isn't it?
It is.
It is crazy.
And why?
But then, like, all this craziness ends up in court.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah, and
needs
what
that?
a waste of resource.
And what a waste of resources that could be used to make more queer possibilities.
Right.
Yeah, just that resources that's going into these ridiculous suits and needing to adopt a child that's already biologically your child. Take that money and give it to like the MSI, and MSI can do something useful with it. I think.
I can do so many useful
That would
things.
be lovely if they would just do what I say. I know. Yeah. It's funny they talk about commercialization though, because like the commercialization of gametes, in Canada, you can't commercialize them, right? So the gametes that are purchased, that are brought to Canada, are all purchased internationally. So the banks are all in the States, where you can pay a gamete donor, whether it's an egg or sperm donor.
Right.
And so we have all these like really strict rules about you can't pay a donor, you can't pay someone to carry a pregnancy for you. But you can in other countries, so we're just going to like let that slide under the radar.
And buying them, so we're
And-
buying
and I
things
could-
that are illegal.
Yes. So this is another big loophole.
You got
in
it.
in the system. Exactly. So so you can't pay a donor here, but you can pay for a donor to go through it in the United States. But you have to pay them in the United States. You can't pay them in Canada. So you do see that sometimes where someone will have a donor who's American who will come to Canada for the procedure, but all the money changes hands in the States because you, heaven forbid, you go against the Canadian Assisted Human Reproduction Act or the SSOR, the Safety of Sperm and Regulations Act. Those are like really complicated, and if we breach them, we can go to jail. So there's a $250,000 fine and years in jail if we breach them. So we have to be really careful not to breach them. But it's just so strange that we value one thing here. And it's the same like the valuing of parentage. Like we value a certain type of parentage, but we don't value another type of parentage. We value a certain type of use of eggs and sperm, but we don't value this other use of it. The society needs to make a decision what it values. And at the end of the day, I think everybody should be valued equally. So it doesn't really matter where or how or what we're getting. Everybody should be seen as equal, and that's kind of what you're arguing. It's what you're arguing. I think we're all arguing the same point.
But then without law reform, the word I was looking for before was derivative parentage. So like this whole reality that you are only derived from your biological material is an archaic concept.
Yes, I agree.
So like we have to redefine what derivative parentage looks like. And I think almost everybody here has named it, which is around people who are intending to parent.
Yeah.
Yes, the intended parents. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And your question earlier of who are these laws protecting? I mean, I think theoretically they're protecting fathers. And I mean cis male fathers.
Right,
and
but I'm the father of my child,
Right.
and it's not protecting me.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And I say fathers with air quotes because that's who the system is thinking it's protecting, is a father's right to their child, but it's not. It's not protecting you. It's not protecting lots of fathers. And it's not protecting in a cis, straight relationship where they use donor sperm for whatever reason at home. That's not protecting anybody in the way that the system is thinking that it's protecting them. They're going under the radar, using donor sperm. As you said, the spouse of the person that's carrying the baby is instructed by law to be the father on the birth certificate, instructed to not put the person whose gametes were used. So that's not protecting genealogy. That's not protecting this derivative at all. It's not. So it's not. It's just discrimination.
I think it's the rules. The rules are written by people in an ancient time. I mean, these rules are old, right? And these rules have been written, but they don't match our society now.
Yeah.
And so these rules need to be rewritten. But it's how you get these rules rewritten. And so that's where all the advocacy has to come through, because
Yeah.
people have to stand up and say, this rule is stupid. This rule needs to change. And then you have to get them to agree with you. And unfortunately, the people that you're talking to, I mean, the two people that I wrote to are both men, right? I got to get them to agree with me and say, huh, really? And and that's where you're saying we need more queer people in these arguments, because having this argument to someone who is already in the community and will say, yeah, you're right, that rule is stupid. But I'm having this argument with people who aren't. And I'm having to explain to them what I mean and explain to them situations that they haven't even fathomed in their brains. And it's like that extra step you have to make to get them to clue into what you're trying to get them to understand.
And so this panel has been amazing to identify some of these places where advocacy can push law reform, can push society's changing views, can push sort of our rights forward. And I just want to extend a very big thank you to each one of you for coming to speak today. Ennis Rapp we'll certainly be writing a letter in support of your letter, Dr. Cockwell. And, you know, we know that the human rights matters are going forward. We know that the court cases are happening, and we need to, you know, continuously push for that law reform. And we thank the Institute for having that space and energy and resources to be able to help us move the law forward. NSRAP is the provincial organization in Nova Scotia that seeks justice for all queer and trans families, and so we will do our part to coordinate these efforts, and we thank you from the bottom of our heart for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Susan.
Thank you.